Say that name one more time, and I will put you in the ground myself. The colonel's fist connected with the orderly's jaw before the echo died. Not a warning shot, a statement. The man crumpled against the stairwell wall, blood splitting his lip, and the colonel crouched down, grabbed a fistful of his collar, and pulled his face up close. A 24-year-old nurse from Ohio just walked into a classified ward and said two words that should not exist outside a black site briefing room. His voice was ice, controlled, surgical. SEAL Team 9, she said it out loud, in front of witnesses. He stood, straightened his jacket. Fix it, or I will fix you. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. Gwen Jenkins had not slept in 31 hours, and she was pretty sure her shoes had rubbed a blister the size of a quarter on her left heel. But she didn't slow down. She never slowed down. That was the thing about her that her supervisors at Ohio State Medical had written in her evaluation 2 years running. Gwendolyn Jenkins does not stop. She doesn't complain. She doesn't ask for help she doesn't need. She just moves. But Naval Medical Center San Diego was not Ohio State Medical. She had learned that in her first 48 hours. Back home, the worst she had dealt with was a drunk college kid who had punched through a window and tried to flirt with her while she stitched his palm closed. Here, the patients didn't flinch when you pressed a wound. They didn't make noise when you changed a dressing that should have made a grown man cry. They just stared at the ceiling with those flat, distant eyes and breathed slowly, like they were running some kind of internal calculation that had nothing to do with pain. It unnerved her. She would not admit that to anyone, but it did. She had been transferred to the restricted ward on a Thursday, Ward 7. Nobody told her what Ward 7 was specifically, only that it required an upgraded security clearance, a signed non-disclosure form, and a reminder from her supervisor, Dr. Patricia Huang, that what she saw and heard in that ward stayed in that ward. Gwen had nodded, signed the form, and gone home that evening thinking she understood what she was walking into. She did not understand. Ward 7 was quiet in the way that pressurized rooms are quiet. Everything functioned normally on the surface. Nurses moved, monitors beeped, orderlies changed linens, but underneath it, there was a tension Gwen could feel in her chest without being able to name. The men in those beds were not like other patients. They were large, most of them. Not just physically large, though they were certainly that. They were large in the way they occupied a room. When one of them looked at you, you felt it. When one of them went still, everyone around them went still too, like the air itself was taking a cue. On her second day in Ward 7, Gwen was assigned to Chief Petty Officer Mike Henderson. The chart said shrapnel injury, lower back and left thigh, secondary infection, now clearing. The chart also had a red stripe along the top that she had not seen on any chart before. And when she asked the outgoing nurse what the stripe meant, the woman, a veteran named Carla, who had been at the Naval Hospital for 11 years, looked at her steadily for a moment and said, "It means you document what you observe. You don't ask him questions about how it happened. You don't reference unit designations. You keep the conversation medical." Gwen had blinked. "I wasn't planning on interviewing him." "Good," Carla said. "Keep not planning on it." Mike Henderson was 38 years old and built like something that had been designed in a factory rather than born. His forearms were crossed over his chest when Gwen walked in, and he was watching the door the way a man watches a door when he's been trained to watch doors, which is to say he had clocked her before she took her second step into the room. His eyes moved to her badge, then her hands, then her face, in that order. She realized he had assessed her before she had time to say, "Good morning." "Chief Henderson," she said, pulling up the rolling stool beside his bed. "I'm Gwen Jenkins. I'll be your primary nurse for the next 3 days." He said nothing. He just looked at her with those flat, measuring eyes. "I'm going to check your dressings and update your IV line," she continued, keeping her voice steady. If you have any pain you want to rate for me, I'm listening. If you don't, that's fine too. I'll get out of your way as fast as I can. Something shifted in his expression then. Not warmth exactly, more like the tiniest recalibration. Ohio, he said. She paused. Excuse me? Your accent. Ohio. She almost smiled. Columbus, born and raised. Long way from Columbus, he said. It is, she agreed. She pulled on her gloves. This is going to pull a little. He didn't flinch. She had expected that. What she had not expected was the other men in the room. There were 4 of them. She had noticed them when she walked in, because you could not notice them. 3 sitting in chairs against the wall, 1 standing near the window, all of them in civilian clothes that somehow made them look more military than a uniform would have. They were there for Henderson. That was immediately clear. They weren't patients. They weren't family in the traditional sense of the word. They were something else. Team, she thought. That was the word that fit. They moved like a unit even when they were sitting still. None of them introduced themselves. None of them looked at her directly. But she had the uncomfortable feeling that all 4 of them were watching her without watching her, the way mirrors watch you in a room. She kept her focus on Henderson, changed his dressing, checked his vitals, updated his chart. The silence in the room was not the comfortable silence of people who are relaxed. It was the silence of people who are waiting for something. And Gwen had the unsettling thought that she did not know what they were waiting for. Henderson spoke first. How long have you been doing this? Nursing? She glanced up. 6 years, trauma focus for the last 3. You like it? I love it, she said, and she meant it in the simple, undefended way of someone who has never had to convince themselves. I like fixing things. People are complicated, but the body isn't. Not really. It wants to heal. You just have to help it. He studied her for a moment. That's a clean way to think about it. Probably too clean, she admitted. Ask me again after a bad shift. One of the men against the wall made a sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh. Gwen glanced over and caught the man nearest the door, dark-haired, early 30s, a scar along his jawline that had healed white and clean. Looking at the floor was something that almost resembled amusement. Don't mind them, Henderson said. They have trouble with civilians. I've noticed, she said. It's not personal. I know. She capped the IV line. I've had worse from hungover fraternity boys. This time 2 of them laughed, briefly and involuntarily, like sounds that escaped before they could stop them. Henderson almost smiled. Almost. She gathered her things and was about to push back the stool when the man by the window spoke for the first time. His voice was low, unhurried. What's your unit assignment, Nurse Jenkins? Just this ward? She looked at him. He was older than the others, mid-40s maybe, with close-cropped gray at his temples, and the kind of posture that suggested he had not voluntarily relaxed his spine in 15 years. His eyes were pale gray and utterly without warmth. Not hostile, just absent of it, the way a camera lens is absent of warmth. It records, it does not feel. Just this ward for now, she said. I was transferred from General Surgical 3 days ago. Transferred voluntarily? She tilted her head slightly. Does that matter? Just curious. Gwen looked at him for a beat longer than was comfortable. My supervisor suggested the reassignment. I was told the ward needed experienced trauma nurses. I put my name in. She paused. Is that sufficient? He didn't answer. He just looked at her. She turned back to Henderson. Your next vitals check is in 4 hours. If that infection site gets any warmer to the touch, or if you get a fever over 101, I want to hear about it. Don't be a hero about it. Henderson said, I'm always a hero. I know, she said. That's exactly what worries me. She was almost at the door when she heard it. Not a sound she made, a sound from the hallway. Raised voices, muffled but sharp, and then a cart being wheeled quickly, and then Dr. Huang's voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Bay 3, move. He's been on the table for 6 hours and the bleeding is not stopping. Gwen stepped into the hall automatically, her body moving toward crisis the way it always had, and she almost collided with an orderly pushing a gurney. She steadied herself against the wall. On the gurney, she caught a glimpse of the patient, male, heavily built, wrapped in field dressings that were dark and soaked through in a way that told her the bleeding was serious and the injury was not recent. He'd been transported. He hadn't come in through the emergency department. He had come in through the side entrance that the restricted ward used for direct transfers. Dr. Huang looked up from the gurney as it passed. "Jenkins, with me." She didn't hesitate. She moved. The next hour was the kind of controlled chaos she was built for. The patient, no name on the chart, just a reference number, had a penetrating injury to the right side that had nicked something it should not have nicked, and what had been managed in the field had started breaking down. Gwen did what she was trained to do. She moved fast. She anticipated. She kept her hands steady and her voice even. And when Dr. Huang said, "Pressure here," she applied it exactly right. And when the attending surgeon arrived and said, "Who's been managing this?" Dr. Huang pointed at Gwen and said, "Her," without hesitation. She didn't feel proud of that. She never felt proud in the moment. There was no room for it. Proud came later, in the car or in the shower. Right now, there was just the work. When it was over and the patient had been stabilized and moved to post-op, Gwen stripped off her gloves and stood for a moment in the scrub area, with her eyes closed and her blood running hot from the adrenaline. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. It was Dr. Huang. "Good work," Huang said. She said it simply, without performance. "Thank you," Gwen exhaled. "Who is he? The patient?" Huang's face changed in a way that Gwen could not read. "Reference number only. That's all you need." "He has a GSW from a high-velocity round. That's not a training injury." "Gwen," Huang said her name quietly and with a weight to it that silenced her. "Reference number only." She nodded. She understood the language of this place well enough by now to know when a door was being closed. She changed out of her soiled scrubs and went back to Ward 7. Henderson was awake and upright when she returned. His team had rearranged themselves. 2 of them were now standing, which felt like a shift in some internal status she couldn't name. The man by the window, the gray-eyed one who had questioned her, was no longer in the room. "Long hour," Henderson observed when she came in. "They sometimes are," she said. She checked his monitor out of habit. Numbers were good. "The guy they brought in." He said it without a question mark. It was not a question. She looked at him. "I can't discuss other patients." "I know," he paused. "I'm not asking you to." She held his gaze. There was something different in his face now. Not the flat measurement from earlier, something closer to concern. And concern on a face like his looked almost foreign, like a language being spoken with an unfamiliar accent. "Is he alive?" Henderson asked. She thought about Huang's voice. Reference number only. She thought about the red stripe on the chart. She thought about signed non-disclosure forms and Carla's warning on her first day. "You should rest," she said. "Your body needs it even if you don't think it does." He held her gaze a beat longer. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes, and she had the feeling she had passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. She was updating his chart when the man with the scar, the one who had almost laughed earlier, came and stood beside her without making any noise at all. She startled slightly, which she hated. He noticed that she startled, and she hated that too. "Sorry," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "It's fine," she kept writing. "You were good in there. Word travels fast on this ward." She glanced sideways. Word travels fast everywhere in hospitals. It's the gossip capital of the world. "Fair point." He paused. A moment of something almost ordinary. "Sergeant First Class Danny Ortega, but nobody calls me that." "What do they call you?" "Depends on who's asking." "Gwen Jenkins," she said. "Everybody calls me that." He almost smiled. It was a cautious smile. the kind that had been trained out of someone and was finding its way back in small increments. You're different than the last civilian they sent in here. Different how? You don't act scared of us. She set down her pen. I'm a trauma nurse. I've held a man's intestines in my hands at 3 a.m. while his wife was in the waiting room. I don't scare easy. He looked at her. What does scare you? She thought about it honestly. Not knowing what I don't know, she said. Blind spots. That scares me. Something moved behind his eyes at that. Something quick and complicated. He looked away. Good answer, he said quietly, and then he went back to his chair. She didn't know why that answer had landed the way it did. She filed it away for later. The rest of the afternoon passed in the rhythm of a normal shift. Medications, chart updates, a brief professional exchange with Henderson about his appetite that ended in him eating half of a protein supplement he clearly despised, and her pretending she hadn't noticed he'd eaten the other half. The gray-eyed man, she still didn't have a name for him, came back into the room around 5 and resumed his position by the window without explanation, and nobody addressed his absence or return. She noticed that Henderson's eyes tracked him when he walked in, a quick, involuntary movement, and that something in Henderson's posture eased slightly after he was back. She noted this the way she noted everything, because that was what she did. She paid attention. It was just before 6 when it happened. She was finishing up Henderson's chart, standing at the rolling workstation near the door, and Ortega had said something to one of the other men about a transfer schedule, and there was noise from the hallway, and someone's radio had crackled with a piece of a transmission that she hadn't caught, and Gwen, tired, her brain working through 3 simultaneous clinical tasks, her heel aching and her coffee cold, heard the last 2 words of the radio transmission through the open door and said, without thinking, without any awareness of what she was saying, simply because the words had snagged in her brain and come out her mouth the way loose words do when you're exhausted. Did that say SEAL Team 9? The room went silent. Not the way a room goes silent when someone says something embarrassing, not the way it goes silent when a monitor alarm trips or a phone rings too loud. It went silent the way a room goes silent when something irreversible has just occurred. Gwen looked up from her chart. Every man in that room had gone completely still. Ortega had stopped mid-sentence. The man nearest the window had straightened from his lean against the wall. Henderson, who had been tilting his head back against the pillow, was now looking directly at her with both eyes fully open, and every trace of the near ease she had earned from him across the afternoon, gone, replaced by something she had not seen on his face before. She could not name it immediately. Then she could. It was alarm, not his own alarm, not personal fear. It was the alarm of a man who has recognized that something bad has happened to someone in front of him, and he does not yet know how bad. The gray-eyed man by the window was looking at her now, actually looking at her, fully, for the first time. His gaze had weight. She felt it physically. What did you say? His voice was quiet. That was the worst part. It was not raised. It was quiet, in the way the building of pressure is quiet before the line breaks. Gwen set down her pen. Her pulse had picked up without her permission. I heard the last part of the radio transmission in the hallway. I thought I heard... Where did you hear that name? He pushed off the wall and took a step toward her. 1 step. He stopped. But 1 step from a man like that in a room this small was enough. I didn't hear a name, she said, keeping her voice level with effort. I heard 2 words. From the radio. In the hallway. I don't know what I heard. Say it again, Ortega said. His voice was different now. The almost warmth of 10 minutes ago had been switched off entirely, and what was underneath it was something flat and professional and frightening. Say exactly what you thought you heard. She looked at him. She looked at Henderson. Henderson was watching her, and his expression said something she couldn't decode. Not a warning exactly, and not a threat. More like a man watching a car approach a flooded road at speed, and calculating whether he can stop it in time. "SEAL Team 9, she said. Absolute silence. Then the gray-eyed man took out his phone. He didn't dial it loudly. He didn't say anything into it she could hear. He just walked to the corner of the room, turned his back, and made a call in a voice too low to catch. And the temperature of the room changed in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Ortega crossed to Gwen in 4 quiet steps. He stood close, not threatening, but present, very present. "Gwen, listen to me carefully. Where did you hear that name?" "I already told you." "Not the radio. Before this. Before today. Did anyone say those words to you? A colleague? Someone you met outside the hospital? Online? Anywhere?" She stared at him. "What? No. I've never heard those words before in my life. I don't even know what they mean. It was just 2 words from a radio in the hallway." "What radio?" Henderson said. His voice was sharp. He had pushed himself upright in the bed. "There's no radio communication on this ward. The hallway uses encrypted phone only." The room contracted around that statement. Gwen's brain processed it 1/2 second behind her instincts, and her instincts had already gone cold. "What do you mean there's no radio?" she said. Henderson was looking at the door, looking past her. His jaw was set. He said, almost to himself, almost under his breath, in a voice she was not sure she was meant to hear, "Then it wasn't a radio." The gray-eyed man snapped his phone closed, turned, and looked at Henderson with an expression that confirmed everything and explained nothing. In the hallway outside Ward 7, Gwen heard the sound of footsteps, more than 2 people, moving in the deliberate, coordinated cadence of people who have a destination and a purpose and no interest in explaining either. She stood in the center of that room with her clipboard in her hands and her pulse hammering in her temples, surrounded by men who were already 3 moves ahead of her, and she understood 2 things simultaneously. The first was that she had said something in this room that could not be unsaid. The second was that whatever those 2 words meant, whatever SEAL Team 9 was, it was something that had just made 4 of the most hardened men she had ever been in a room with look at her the way people look at someone standing at the edge of something very high and very dangerous. Like they were deciding whether they could get to her in time. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Not gradually, not the way footsteps stop when someone reaches a destination and pauses to knock. They stopped all at once, like a command had been given. And the silence that followed was the kind that presses against your eardrums. Gwen did not move. None of the men moved. For exactly 3 seconds the room held its breath. Then the gray-eyed man, she still did not have a name for him, crossed the room in 5 steps and positioned himself between Gwen and the door. Not in front of her, slightly to the side. The way a person stands when they are protecting something without wanting the thing they're protecting to know it. Henderson had his hand under his pillow. She registered that detail and understood it immediately and wished she hadn't. The door opened. It was Dr. Huang, alone. Her face was composed in the way that faces are composed when a great deal of effort is going into composing them. She looked at the gray-eyed man first, then at the room, then at Gwen. "Jenkins," she said, "with me, now." Gwen did not move immediately. Something in her, the part of her that had been paying attention for the last hour, cataloging and filing and connecting, said, "Wait. Just 1 second. Wait." Henderson said quietly, "Go." She went. Huang walked her down the hall at a pace that was not quite fast enough to look urgent, and not quite slow enough to look casual, and Gwen matched her step for step, and said nothing until they were through a set of double doors and into the administrative corridor, which was empty at this hour, the overhead lights on their evening dimmer. "What happened in there?" Huang said. Her voice was low. "I thought I heard something from the hallway," Gwen said. "I said something I apparently shouldn't have said. I don't even know what it means. I said 2 words and every person in that room—" "Stop." Huang put a hand on her arm. "Not hard, just definitive. Do not say those words again. Not here, not in this building, not outside this building, not on the phone, not in a text, not written down. Do you understand me? Gwen stared at her. Patricia, what is going on? Huang looked at her for a long moment. She looked, Gwen thought, like a person calculating the cost of honesty and finding it just barely within budget. You've been assigned to this ward for 3 days, she said, and in 3 days you've done excellent work and asked 0 questions that you weren't supposed to ask. That is why I put you here. Because you are smart and you are disciplined and you know how to read a room. She paused. Tonight you did not read the room. I heard something from the hallway. There is no radio communication on this ward, Gwen. The same thing Henderson had said. Hearing it from Huang made it land differently, heavier. Then what did I hear? Huang didn't answer. She looked at the wall for a moment, then back. Go home tonight. Come back tomorrow at your regular time. Do not talk to anyone about what happened in that room. Not colleagues, not friends, not family. No one. She squeezed Gwen's arm once and let go. I mean this. Are you in danger? Gwen said. Huang blinked. It was the first unguarded thing her face had done. Why would you ask that? Because you're scared, Gwen said simply. And you don't scare. So whoever just scared you, I want to know who that is. Huang held her gaze for a long beat. Then she said, Go home, Gwen, and walked away. And Gwen stood in the dimmed corridor and listened to the sound of her own heartbeat and tried to make sense of the shape of what she had stumbled into. She couldn't, not yet, but she was already pulling on threads. She took the long way to the locker room, the route that passed the side entrance where restricted transfers came in. She wasn't sure why. Instinct, maybe. The same instinct that had made her a good trauma nurse. The one that said, keep looking until the picture makes sense. Because the picture always makes sense if you look long enough. The side entrance was empty. The corridor beyond it was empty. But on the floor near the wall, half kicked under the edge of a cart that hadn't been moved recently enough, there was a field dressing wrapper. Olive drab, military issue, the kind that doesn't come from a hospital supply room. She looked at it for a moment. She didn't pick it up. She kept walking. In the parking lot, alone, she sat in her car without starting it and replayed the day in her head the way she replayed complicated cases. Methodically, in order, without allowing herself to skip anything because it felt insignificant. The man they'd brought in through the side entrance, reference number only, no name, no chart stripe, no attending listed. GSW from a high-velocity round. Field dressings already applied. Dr. Huang arriving at the side entrance personally rather than dispatching a resident. Henderson's reaction when she'd mentioned the unnamed patient. Is he alive? Not, who is he? Not, what happened? Is he alive? Like he already knew who it was. The gray-eyed man making a call in a corner when she said the name. Not notifying security, not calling administration. A personal call, quiet, turned away. And then, there is no radio communication on this ward, which meant she had heard something. Something real. Something that had carried 2 words through an open door and into her exhausted brain. And whatever it was, it had been saying those words in a place where those words should not have been said out loud. She started her car. She drove home. She did not sleep. By 4 in the morning, she had decided 2 things. The first was that she was going back. Of course she was going back. Walking away was not a thing she knew how to do. The second was that she was going to find out what she was walking back into before she walked back into it. She opened her laptop. She typed 2 words into a search engine. She got nothing. She refined the search 3 different ways. She got nothing meaningful. A few forum posts from years ago, half coherent, the kind of thing you find on the deep end of military enthusiast sites where people speculate about things they don't actually know. Nothing confirmed, nothing sourced. One post from 5 years ago, since deleted, that had been archived by a bot, that said only, "They don't exist on paper. That's the point. That's the whole point." She stared at that sentence for a long time. At 6:30, she showered and put on her scrubs and drove back to the Naval Hospital and told herself she was just doing her job. Ortega was in the hallway outside Ward 7 when she arrived. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a paper coffee cup in one hand, and he straightened when he saw her in a way that suggested he had been waiting, though she couldn't prove it. "You came back," he said. "I have a shift," she said. "I know." He fell into step beside her. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you did." She looked at him sideways. "Why?" "Because it means you're not stupid." He said it plainly. Not a compliment, not an insult, a straightforward observation. Stupid people either run or they go talk to someone. You came back and you kept quiet. That's the right move. "I don't know what the right move is," she said. "I don't know what game I'm playing." He was quiet for a moment. "How much do you want to know?" She stopped walking. He stopped too. They were in the middle of the hallway, and she looked directly at him and said, "I want to know everything. I want to know what I said. I want to know why it landed the way it did. And I want to know who that patient was that came in through the side entrance yesterday, because Henderson knew him. Henderson asked if he was alive. That tells me the men on your team know exactly who got shot and brought in, which means this isn't a random combat casualty. It's something else." She paused. "How much of that is correct?" He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him make a decision. She could see it happening, the internal calculation, the weighing of costs. "More than I'm comfortable with," he said finally. She nodded. "Then let's go somewhere we can talk." He took her to a small office off the physical therapy wing that she suspected he did not have official authorization to use. The room had a table, 2 chairs, a whiteboard with someone else's scheduling notes, and no windows. He closed the door. He sat down. She sat across from him. "The man they brought in yesterday," he said. "His name is Caleb Riker." The name meant nothing to her. She nodded to show she was listening. Caleb Riker was officially listed as killed in action 14 months ago. His family was notified. There was a service. He paused. There was a folded flag. She felt the wrongness of that the way you feel a wrong note in a familiar song. He's not dead. He's not dead. Why was he listed as dead? Ortega's jaw moved. Because he was part of a unit that does not exist on any official record. And when you're part of that unit and you decide you want out, when you decide that what they're asking you to do is past a line you won't cross, they don't let you resign. He looked at his hands. They retire you, permanently. Only Riker made it out before they could finish the job. He's been running for 14 months, living off grid, moving every few weeks. Someone found him 3 days ago. Gwen processed this. Her brain was moving fast, and she let it. "The unit," she said. "That's what I said last night. That's why the room went." She stopped. "It's real. Whatever I heard from the hallway, the name is real." "It's real," he said. "And there are maybe 12 people in this building who know that. And as of last night, you're one of them." She sat with that for a moment. "Is that why someone is trying to shut me down?" "Huang told me not to say those words again." "The gray-eyed man." "Alcott," Ortega said. "Commander Alcott." "Alcott made a phone call the second I said it. He positioned himself in front of me when the door opened. He's not just reacting, he's managing. He's been managing since last night. Who is he managing?" "Above my pay grade," Ortega said, and the way he said it told her it was not above his awareness, only above what he was prepared to say out loud in a room he wasn't sure was clean. She noted that, filed it. "Riker," she said, "is he going to make it?" Ortega's expression shifted. "That's the right question." A pause. "Physically, probably yes. If your doctor friend stops the bleeding and keeps it clean, but physically isn't the problem." He met her eyes. He had something on him when they brought him in. Evidence. digital and physical. Documentation of operations that never happened officially. Names, dates, locations, orders. The kind of thing that, if it reaches the right people outside this system, brings the whole structure down. She felt the weight of that. Not abstract weight, real, specific, pressing weight, the kind that sits in your sternum. Where is it now? We don't know, he said. That's the problem. They stripped him before they brought him in. Standard protocol for inbound transfers, and whoever made the call to do it either didn't know what he was carrying or knew exactly what he was carrying. Who made the call? He looked at her. The look lasted just long enough to answer without answering. She said slowly, "Someone in this hospital." He said nothing. "Someone in this hospital," she said again, "is connected to the unit that is trying to kill Caleb Riker. And that same person knows Riker is here right now, recovering from a wound that was meant to kill him. And that same person..." She stopped. She made herself stop because the chain was extending further than she was ready for, and she needed to anchor herself before she followed it. How long has Alcott known? About Riker being here? Since the transfer was ordered. About the evidence? We think he suspects. He's not saying. Ortega leaned back. Alcott and Riker go back a long way. Before all of this, I don't know what that history costs Alcott right now, but I know it's not nothing. Gwen stared at the whiteboard with someone else's scheduling notes and thought about Henderson asking, "Is he alive?" and the gray-eyed man making a quiet phone call, and Dr. Huang saying, "Not in a text, not written down, not anywhere." She thought about the field dressing wrapper on the floor by the side entrance, and the way the whole ward had been holding its breath since she arrived, and she realized it had been holding its breath before she arrived. That she had walked into something already in motion, already hot, and she had simply been the accidental spark that made visible what was already burning. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "You don't know me. You knew me for one afternoon." He was quiet for a moment. "Because you noticed Riker on that gurney and you clocked it. Because you told Henderson the honest thing about what scares you. And because Alcott has had you assessed since last night, and he hasn't given the order to have you removed from this ward, which means he's decided you're either harmless or useful. And I don't think you're harmless." He paused. "Neither does he." She absorbed that. "You're saying he's watching me. I'm saying everyone in that room made a decision about you last night, Alcott included. And what was his decision?" "Ask him yourself," Ortega said. "He's in Henderson's room. He's been there since 6 this morning." He stood. "And Gwen, be careful about what you say in there. Alcott is not the enemy, but he is not entirely safe either. He's somewhere in between, and that is a very uncomfortable place for everyone around him." She stood too. "Welcome to every ICU I've ever worked in," she said. He almost smiled. Again, that careful, recovered smile. "You're going to be interesting," he said. "I genuinely can't tell if that's a good thing." She walked back to Ward 7. Henderson was sitting upright when she came in. His color was better than yesterday, and she noted it clinically, even as she was noting other things. Alcott was sitting in the chair nearest the window. In the chair, not standing, which felt like a choice. With his ankle crossed over his knee, and his pale gray eyes already on her before she was fully through the door. "Nurse Jenkins," he said. His voice was the same as yesterday. No warmth added, no warmth removed. Perfectly calibrated. "Commander," she said, because Ortega had given her the rank, and she wanted him to know she'd done her homework. Something moved in his eyes, quick, like a fish in deep water. "Ortega," he said, without looking at Ortega, who had followed her in and was now leaning against the far wall. "She asked the right questions," Ortega said simply. Alcott looked at her for a moment. "Sit down, Miss Jenkins." She sat. She put her clipboard in her lap, and she held his gaze steadily, and she waited, because waiting was sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do in a room like this. "You know more than you knew yesterday," he said. "Some things," she said. More than is safe. Probably, he nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed a hypothesis he'd been running overnight. The evidence Riker was carrying, he said, you've been briefed on this. Partially. We need to know where it is. He uncrossed his ankle, leaned forward slightly. Before the people who want it find it first. Because if they find it first, it disappears. Everything Riker risked his life to gather, everything those operations documented, every name, every order, it disappears. And the unit that has been operating outside every convention and law this country claims to stand for keeps operating. He paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She understood. She understood it the way she understood a diagnosis when all the symptoms suddenly aligned. Not with surprise, but with the grim clarity of a picture that had been assembling itself piece by piece and had finally completed. You need to find it before whoever inside this hospital is connected to them does. Yes. And you think I can help? I think, he said carefully, that you have access to spaces in this hospital that we don't. I think Riker may have concealed the evidence during transport. I think the people looking for it are moving carefully because they can't be obvious without exposing themselves. And I think, he said, that a civilian trauma nurse moving through this hospital doing her ordinary job is invisible in a way that none of us are. Henderson spoke from the bed. You don't have to do this, he said. He said it directly to her, not around her, not managing her the way Alcott managed everyone. He said it like it mattered what she chose. You didn't ask to be here. No, she said, I didn't. She looked at her clipboard for a moment, at the medication schedule, the vital sign charts, the ordinary architecture of the job she had come here to do. Then she looked up. Where was Riker during the 40 minutes between the side entrance and post-op? Alcott and Henderson exchanged a look. Bay 3 was occupied when he arrived, she continued. There was a 12-minute delay before the operating room was cleared. He was on a gurney in the staging corridor. I walked past that corridor at the end of the procedure. No one was with him at that point. He was alone for a window. He was unconscious, Alcott said. He'd lost significant blood. People do things when they're semi-conscious that they can't explain afterward, she said. Trauma response. Muscle memory. A man who has been running for 14 months hiding something every time he stops. She let that sit. I need to walk that corridor again. Alone and not quickly. Alcott studied her. You're not scared, he said, and it sounded less like a compliment and more like a thing he was filing away. I'm terrified, she said, but I'm a nurse. I do the work when I'm terrified. That's the whole job. Henderson made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. It was the sound of a man who has spent a long time surrounded by people trained to pretend fear doesn't exist, hearing someone simply acknowledge it without apology, and finding it more remarkable than he expected. Alcott stood. He was taller than he seemed in the chair. The staging corridor, he said, Bay 3 adjacent, the storage alcove at the end. It's marked biohazard, but it's been inactive for 2 months. Riker would have known that. She felt the pull of it, the same pull she felt at the start of a complicated case, when the pieces were just beginning to arrange themselves into something she could work with. How would he have known the layout of a hospital he'd never been in? He was briefed on the extraction route, Alcott said, which means he was briefed on the building, which means the people hunting him also know the building. Yes, she stood. She straightened her clipboard under her arm, and she looked at Henderson one more time, because he was the only person in this room who had told her she didn't have to do this, and she wanted him to see that she had heard it. I'll check back on your dressings in 2 hours, she said. He nodded, just once, but his eyes said something that his voice didn't, and she carried it with her down the hall. She had almost reached the staging corridor when she heard footsteps behind her, measured, quiet, deliberately matched to her pace. Not Ortega's, not Alcott's. She had learned their rhythms already the way she learned patience, by sound, by pattern, by the specific weight of how someone puts their foot down. These were new. She did not speed up. She did not slow down. She turned the corner into the staging corridor and walked to the storage alcove marked with its inactive biohazard placard. And she kept her face neutral and her body language ordinary. And behind her, the footsteps kept coming. And she understood with absolute cold clarity that whoever was behind her was not someone Alcott had sent. She put her hand on the alcove door. The footsteps stopped. She turned around. The man standing at the end of the corridor was in hospital administration scrubs, a badge clipped at his breast pocket, and he was looking at her with a kind of carefully manufactured blankness that she recognized immediately because she had seen it in that stairwell yesterday on the face of a man who had just been told to find her. He was not a nurse. He was not a doctor. He was not administration. His hands were at his sides, and one of them was not empty. And Gwen Jenkins, 24 years old from Columbus, Ohio, who fixed things because bodies wanted to heal and she just had to help them, took one breath, turned the alcove handle, and stepped inside. The alcove was dark and smelled of antiseptic and old rubber tubing, and Gwen pressed herself against the inside wall and pulled the door closed behind her and stood in the absolute black and listened. The footsteps outside did not come closer. They did not retreat either. They simply stopped, and the man wearing the wrong scrubs and the wrong badge and the wrong expression stood at the end of the corridor and waited. And the waiting was somehow worse than if he had moved. A man who moves can be tracked. A man who waits has already made a calculation you don't know about yet. She controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Trauma nurses learn breath control the same way soldiers do, not in a classroom, but in the specific crucible of a moment when panic is the least useful thing available. Her hand was in her scrub pocket. She had her phone. She did not want to light the screen and show the glow under the door. She thought about Ortega. She thought about Alcott. She thought about the fact that she had walked into this corridor alone because that was the plan. That was the operational logic Alcott had laid out. And the plan had not accounted for someone already being in position, which meant someone had moved faster than Alcott expected, which meant the person inside the hospital, the one connected to the unit, the one Ortega had refused to name out loud, had been watching the ward since last night, since she said those 2 words. Since the room went silent and Alcott made his quiet phone call and the machinery of containment began turning, they'd had just as much time as Alcott had, maybe more. She heard the corridor door open, footsteps entering, new ones, 2 sets. She felt the change in air pressure that bodies create in an enclosed space. A voice, low, flat, male. Clear down to Bay 3. A second voice answering. She went in there. A pause. Then we wait. She made her decision in under 2 seconds, which was how long she usually had to make decisions that mattered. She found the edge of the alcove shelf by touch, patted along it with deliberate, careful hands, kept her breathing silent, kept her body still, and thought about what Alcott had said. Riker would have known the layout. He was briefed on the building, briefed on the extraction route. The extraction route did not end at a storage alcove. Storage alcoves were waypoints, not exits. She moved her hands further along the back wall of the alcove and found what she was looking for because she had been in enough hospital storage rooms to know their architecture. The utility access panel, set into the base of the wall, originally designed for electrical routing, large enough for someone who was not large, which she was not. She got on her knees in the dark and found the panel latches by touch and released them without a sound, or nearly without a sound. One of them gave a small metallic click that she felt in her molars. And she slid through feet first and pulled the panel back into its frame and lay in the utility space behind the wall and breathed and did not move. Outside, the voices moved closer. She heard the alcove door open. Empty. She can't have gone far. Check the panel. She was already moving. The utility passage ran parallel to the corridor for about 30 feet, and then opened into a maintenance hub she hadn't known existed, but was grateful for. She came out through a second panel into a supply corridor on the other side of the ward and stood up and brushed the dust off her knees and kept walking like she had somewhere to be, because she did. She sent the text to Ortega from the stairwell. 3 words. Someone is inside. Send. His reply came back in 45 seconds. Where are you? Not a question mark, a demand. Supply corridor B. Going back to 7, stay there, do not move. She ignored that and kept moving. Ward 7 felt different when she pushed through the doors. The energy had changed, the way pressure changes before a storm breaks. Not visible, not nameable, but felt in the skin. Henderson was on his feet. He should not have been on his feet. He was standing beside his bed in his hospital gown, with the IV line still in his arm. And Alcott was beside him, and 2 of the other men had moved from their chairs to the door. And when Gwen came in, all of them looked at her with the particular intensity of people who had been in the middle of deciding whether to go find her. There are 2 of them, she said. She kept her voice steady. Administration scrubs. One had something in his hand. I didn't get a clear look. They were stationed at the end of the staging corridor before I got there. They knew where I was going. Alcott's expression did not change. That was more unsettling than if it had. How did you get out? Utility access panel in the back of the alcove. Henderson looked at her. Something had crossed his face that she couldn't name immediately, and then she could. It was the same expression Ortega had used twice now. The one that looked like recalibration, like a mental model being quietly updated. He said, "You knew about the panel." "I guessed," she said. "Hospital infrastructure is hospital infrastructure. The materials change, the layout doesn't." She looked at Alcott. "They move before you expected." "Yes," he said, simply, without defensiveness. A man who does not waste energy on pride when the situation doesn't allow for it. Which means the person inside this building made contact faster than your timeline accounted for. Which means they were already on alert before last night. Before I said anything. She paused. Which means Riker's arrival triggered it, not me. The room shifted. She felt it. Ortega came through the door behind her, slightly winded. He looked at Gwen, then at Alcott, then at the 2 men by the door. Corridors clear. They pulled back. Building security found no one matching the description. He paused. Whoever they are, they know how to disappear in a civilian facility. "They're trained," Henderson said from beside his bed. His voice had a flat certainty to it. "This isn't outside contractors. This is someone who knows how to move inside an institution without looking like they're moving." "Medical training?" Gwen said. "Or enough exposure to it," Alcott said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You said one of them had something in his hand." "Right hand, low grip. He wasn't brandishing it. He was holding it like he was used to it." "Did you see the object clearly?" "No, I made the decision to move before I could." She met his gaze. "Was that the wrong call?" He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. "No," he said. Henderson sat back down on the bed with the slow deliberateness of a man who is refusing to acknowledge that standing hurt. Gwen crossed to him automatically, the nurse in her overriding everything else, and checked the IV line, checked that the movement hadn't disturbed his dressings, and he let her do it with the same resigned tolerance of someone who has given up arguing with forces of nature. "The evidence," she said, still working. "I didn't get to the alcove. If it was there, I couldn't." "It wasn't in the alcove," Alcott said. She stopped, looked up. "What?" "I got a message from Riker 20 minutes ago." He said it with the controlled delivery of someone releasing a piece of information he has been holding tightly. He regained full consciousness around 0900. "He's been asking for me since then." Dr. Huang held the message. A pause. She did not know she was holding it. The implication of that was cold and specific. Gwen felt it the way you feel a drop in temperature, not dramatically, but immediately, in the exposed skin. Huang is holding his communications. Huang is facilitating communications through a channel that is being monitored, Alcott said. She may not know that, or she may. He said it without accusation, without conclusion. Just the statement, clean and bladed. Either way, Riker's message did not come through Huang. It came through a secondary route. What did it say? Ortega said. Alcott looked at Gwen, not at Ortega, at Gwen. He said, "Give it to the nurse, the Ohio one." Another pause. Those were his exact words. The silence that followed was the silence of a room reconfiguring itself around a new piece of information. Gwen felt it on her skin, felt every set of eyes in the room making a fresh assessment of her, felt the weight of a dying man's instructions landing on her shoulders from a room she hadn't been in, from a man she had technically saved and never formally met. "He doesn't know me," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "He knows about you," Alcott said. "Riker has been in this building for 36 hours, unconscious for most of them, but not all of them." "He heard something," Henderson said. "When you were working on him, he heard your voice." She thought back to the procedure, the controlled chaos of Bay 3, the surgeon's instructions, her own voice cutting through. "Pressure here, 2 units, watch the line." Clean and direct, the voice of someone who knew what they were doing. She hadn't known who she was working on. She hadn't known any of it. She had just been doing her job. And somewhere in the semi-conscious periphery of a man who had been running and hiding and bleeding for 14 months, that voice had registered as something he could trust. She felt the weight of that land in her chest and stay there. "Where is it?" she said. "What he gave me." "We don't know yet," Alcott said. He was moved from staging to post-op before he could leave it anywhere deliberate. But in the transfer, there was a window. Your supply cart, the one you were using in Bay 3. It was staged in the corridor before the procedure and left thereafter. Gwen thought about the cart, standard trauma supply configuration. She had restocked it herself before the procedure. It had been in the corridor for approximately 40 minutes before someone moved it back to the supply room. Standard post-procedure protocol. "Which supply room?" she said. 7B, Ortega said. Same corridor as the alcove. She looked at Alcott. The 2 men in the corridor. They weren't waiting for me to find something. They were waiting for me to lead them to something. A beat. They don't know exactly where it is either. "No," Alcott said, "which gives us a window, a narrow one." Henderson said from the bed, "It's not narrow, it's closing." His voice had changed. The measured, careful quality was still there, but underneath it something had tightened. "If they're in the building in this configuration, 2 positioned, 1 monitoring communications, 1 directing from outside, this is an active retrieval operation. They're not surveilling anymore, they're extracting." He looked at Alcott. "We have maybe 2 hours before they shift to a harder approach." "What does harder approach mean?" Gwen asked, though something in her already knew. Henderson looked at her with those direct, honest eyes. "It means they stop caring about being discreet." The room absorbed that. Ortega was already by the door. "I can get to 7B in 4 minutes." "No," Alcott said. "They'll have it covered." He was looking at Gwen again. The look had a particular quality that she was beginning to recognize. Not cold, not warm, but precise, like a measurement being taken. "You're still the invisible one." "I was invisible until about 2 hours ago," she said. "You're still a nurse in a naval hospital doing her job. They're 2 men in stolen scrubs trying not to be seen. In any direct comparison, you win." He paused. "Unless they've already decided to stop being careful." "Have they?" He held her gaze. "I don't know. And that's what makes this the moment." She stood in the middle of Ward 7 with her clipboard under her arm, and the weight of a supply cart and a dead man's instructions, and an unknown object and 2 armed men in a corridor, and a compromised communication channel, and an entire shadow unit that had been operating outside the law for years. All of it converging on a Tuesday morning in a naval hospital in San Diego. And she thought about what Henderson had said when she first mentioned being scared. He hadn't dismissed it. He hadn't fixed it. He had just looked at her like it meant something that she could say it out loud. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what I'm looking for." Alcott reached into his jacket and placed a small object on the bed beside Henderson. A black thumb drive, scratched along one edge, with a piece of medical tape wrapped around it that had 3 characters written on it in black marker. Not letters, not numbers she recognized in the usual sense. A code, small and deliberate, the work of a man who encoded everything by habit. "That's what we believe it looks like," he said, "or something very close. Riker used this configuration before." She looked at it. She did not touch it. She pressed the image into her memory the way she memorized drug interactions and wound measurements. Exact. Permanent. "Medical tape," she said. "He wrapped it in medical tape. He had access to field dressings during transport," Ortega said. "He could have repurposed the adhesive strip. Or he put it somewhere it would blend in," she said. "On a supply cart in a hospital, wrapped in medical tape, a thumb drive looked like a label, a reminder note, a piece of equipment that someone had marked for return. It looked like nothing. It looked like exactly the right nothing." "He's good," she said quietly. "He's the best we ever had," Henderson said. And he said it with the flatness of someone stating a fact that causes them pain. She picked up her clipboard. She straightened her badge. She looked at Ortega. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, 15, he said. 15, she agreed. She looked at Alcott one more time. He gave her nothing back. No encouragement, no reassurance, no visible concern. Just that measuring gaze. She decided she preferred it. She didn't need to be managed. She needed to know the truth. And Alcott's face always told the truth even when his mouth was selective. She went back into the hallway. The supply corridor felt different this time. She moved through it the way she moved through every critical situation. Not fast enough to draw attention, not slow enough to give doubt a foothold. Head up, clipboard forward, purpose in every step. She passed 2 orderlies, a physical therapist she recognized from the break room, a physician she didn't know who didn't look at her. Everyone in a hospital is moving towards something, and no one looks twice at a nurse moving towards something. Supply room 7B. The door was closed but unlocked. She went in. The cart was exactly where standard protocol put it, against the left wall, restocked by whoever had closed up after the procedure. She went to it calmly. She started from the top shelf and worked down. Methodical, the way she inventoried everything, and she was on the 3rd shelf when she found it. Not the drive, not yet. What she found was that the 3rd shelf had been disturbed. The gauze rolls were slightly off their usual stacking arrangement. Nothing dramatic, nothing a casual eye would catch. But she was not a casual eye, and she had restocked this cart herself, and she knew where everything was. Someone had been through it, carefully, but not carefully enough. Not carefully enough for her. Which meant someone had already been in this room, and either they had found it or they hadn't found it, and she did not yet know which. She kept her hands moving, methodical. She lifted the gauze rolls. She checked under the shelf liner. She checked the frame of the cart where 2 bars met at the base, the kind of junction that creates a small, flat surface, invisible unless you crouched and looked directly at it from below. And she did crouch, and she did look, and there was nothing there. Her pulse picked up. She controlled it. She moved to the secondary cart, the one stored behind the primary, the overflow inventory, the cart nobody uses unless the first one is depleted, the cart that nobody would think to check because nobody uses it. Riker had been briefed on the layout. He wouldn't have left it somewhere obvious. He would have left it somewhere that required knowing the space. She pulled the secondary cart out from the wall and looked at its underside, at the frame joints, at the wheel housing, and on the inner face of the left rear wheel housing, attached with a strip of medical tape wound once around the axle support, was a thumb drive with a scratch along one edge. She stood very still for exactly 1 second. Then she heard the supply room door open behind her. She did not turn around. She pulled the drive free with one motion and closed her hand around it and stood up and turned. And it was not the man in the wrong scrubs. It was Dr. Patricia Huang, and she was alone. And the expression on her face was the expression of someone who has arrived at a destination they have been dreading. "Gwen," Huang said. Her voice was careful, too careful, the over-controlled voice of a person managing something interior. "Patricia," Gwen said. She kept her hand at her side with the drive in her fist, and she made her face do nothing. Huang looked at the cart, then at Gwen, then at her hand. "Did you find it?" she said quietly. Gwen held her gaze. "Find what?" Huang closed her eyes for half a second. It was the most human thing Gwen had seen her do in 3 days. "I need you to listen to me. There are people in this building right now who are not who they say they are, and they are running out of patience. And the safest thing you can do, the only safe thing, is to give me whatever you found and let me handle this through the right channels." "What channels?" Gwen said. "The ones running through your communication system? The one that held Riker's message this morning?" Huang's face changed. The composed surface cracked, just slightly, just enough. "You don't know what you're in the middle of." "Then tell me," Gwen said. "Tell me right now. Not the managed version, not the version where you protect me by keeping me ignorant. The real version." Huang pressed her lips together. Her eyes were wet, which Gwen had not expected. Not from Patricia Huang. Not from a woman who had been in this hospital for 15 years and had presumably seen everything and been moved by very little. "They threatened my daughter," Huang said. The room contracted. 3 days ago," Huang continued, her voice cracking on the edges and then recovering, the way voices do when someone is using everything they have to stay functional. "A man came to my house. He knew her school, her schedule, her name. He knew everything. He said if Riker survived and if the evidence left this building, they would—" She stopped. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment. Then she took it away. "I didn't have a choice. You held his messages," Gwen said. "I held his messages. I flagged the transfer through the monitored channel. She stopped again. "I told myself it was just communication, that I wasn't hurting him directly, that they just needed to know where he was." Her voice broke fully on the last word, and then she pulled it back together with visible effort. "But they sent those 2 men this morning, and I realized that what I thought I was doing and what I was actually doing were not the same thing." Gwen looked at her for a long moment. She felt the weight of it, the threat against a child, the impossible position, the small compromises that cascade into large ones before you understand what's happened. She felt it without excusing it and without condemning it, because she was a person who lived in the space between clean and complicated, and she knew that space well. "Where is your daughter right now?" she said. Huang blinked. "At school. Why?" "Because the people who threatened her are standing in this building watching their operation fall apart," Gwen said. "And when it does, and it is going to, the threat doesn't evaporate, it escalates." She kept her voice level. "We need to get her somewhere safe, right now, before this is over." Huang stared at her. "You're not. You should be running. Why are you?" "Because you just told me the truth," Gwen said. "And I told you on day 1 that blind spots scare me." She looked at the door. "I need you to call Alcott. Not through the monitored channel, your personal phone, his direct number. Do you have it?" Huang nodded, barely. "Call him now. Tell him what you told me. Tell him about your daughter. He will move on it. I don't know him well enough to know everything, but I know that." She paused. "I know that." Huang reached for her phone with a hand that was not entirely steady, and from the corridor outside the supply room, very close, not bothering to be quiet anymore, came the sound of footsteps. Not one set this time, not 2, the sound of several people moving in formation, with purpose, past the threshold of discretion. exactly the way Henderson had warned they would when they stopped caring about being seen. Harder approach. Gwen closed her fingers tighter around the drive in her palm and looked at Huang and said quietly, clearly, with no wasted syllables, "Is there another way out of this room?" Huang looked at the back wall. At a door behind a shelving unit, marked in faded red letters that had been there longer than either of them had been in this building. "Emergency access. Do not block." "Yes," Huang said. "Then we go," Gwen said. "Right now." And they went. The emergency access door opened into a stairwell that smelled of concrete and old paint, and Gwen moved through it first with Huang, one step behind her. And the moment the door closed, the sound from the supply corridor was cut to near silence. Near, not complete, because she could still feel the vibration of movement through the walls. Multiple bodies coordinating in a space designed for a different kind of work. She took the stairs up, not down. Down was predictable. Down was exit, and exits were covered. That was the first thing she understood about the men who had just entered that corridor. They had been trained to cover exits. So she went up, one flight, two, and Huang followed without question, because whatever calculation Huang had been running for the last 3 days had finally resolved itself into something that looked like trust. And Gwen was aware of the weight of that even while she was moving. Third floor. She pushed through into the administrative wing. Quieter here. Offices, conference rooms, the bureaucratic layer of the hospital that ran parallel to everything else and touched almost none of it. She found an empty conference room, went in, held the door for Huang, and let it close. "Your phone," she said. "Call him now." Huang was already dialing. Her hands were steadier than before. Not steady, but steadier. The kind of functional calm that arrives when a decision has been fully made and the cost of it accepted. She put the phone to her ear. Gwen watched her face and waited. 3 seconds. 4. Then Huang said, "It's Huang. I need to speak to Alcott. Directly. Personal line." A pause. "Because I just walked away from the monitored channel, and I need him to know why." Another pause, shorter. "My daughter's name is Sophie. She's 9 years old. And the people in this building right now know exactly where she is. And I need someone to—" Her voice broke on the last syllable, and she held it back with everything she had. "Please." Gwen watched her listen to whatever came back. Watched the tension in her jaw shift from one kind to another, from dread to something closer to relief, which was not the same as safety, but was at least the direction of it. Huang lowered the phone and looked at Gwen. "He's sending someone to Sophie's school, and he wants us to stay where we are. He knows where we are?" He asked which floor. Huang almost made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He said, "Third floor administrative, conference room facing west." He said it before I told him. Gwen absorbed that. "He had someone tracking me." "He had someone tracking you," Huang confirmed. She should have felt violated by that. She examined the feeling and found it wasn't violation. It was the opposite. The specific relief of knowing that someone competent had been watching, that she had not been as alone in that corridor as she felt. She filed that feeling away to examine more carefully later, when there was a later. She sat down. She opened her hand and looked at the drive. It sat in her palm, small and scratched and wrapped in medical tape, carrying the weight of 14 months of a man's survival and everything he had risked his life to document. She had been holding it for 6 minutes. It felt like it had been there longer. "Riker," she said, "I need to see him." Huang looked at her. "He's in post-op." "I know, I need to see him." "Gwen, he is not stable enough for—" "He asked for me by name, by description." She looked up from the drive. "He put this somewhere he knew I would find it, based on hearing my voice during a procedure while he was semi-conscious and bleeding out. He made that calculation in that condition." She paused. "He's coherent. He's been coherent for hours. I need to hear from him directly what is on this drive and who needs to receive it, because I am not handing this to anyone, Not Alcott, not you, not Henderson, without understanding what I'm handing over and where it needs to go. Huang looked at her for a long moment. Something in her face settled, the way a picture settles when you adjust the frame. He's going to like you, she said. I don't need him to like me, Gwen said. I need him to talk to me. The door opened. Ortega came through it and closed it behind him in the same motion, moving with the compressed efficiency of someone who had covered the distance between Ward 7 and the third floor at a pace that didn't show on his face, but showed in the slight expansion of his chest. He looked at Gwen, then at Huang, then at Gwen's closed hand. You found it, he said. I found it. The corridor went active 30 seconds after you went through the emergency door. They had 3 people. He glanced at Huang. Alcott got your call. Back to Gwen. He wants you both in post-op in 10 minutes. Riker? Awake, asking for you again. He paused and something crossed his face, an expression she had learned to read in the last 24 hours, the one that meant information was being weighed before delivery. There's something else. She waited. The 2 men in the corridor. Building security picked one of them up trying to leave through the loading dock. He looked at the wall for a moment. He's active duty, Gwen, not a contractor, not a mercenary. Current active duty Navy, assigned to a logistics unit at this base. The room went very quiet. That means this isn't external, she said. No, he said, it is not external. Huang made a small sound, not quite a word, not quite anything else. Just the sound of a woman processing the specific shape of what she had been coerced into, understanding now that the man who had come to her house and named her daughter's school had not been a threat from outside the system. He had been the system, wearing the system's face. Gwen stood. She put the drive in the breast pocket of her scrubs and buttoned the pocket closed. It was the most deliberate thing she had done all morning, that specific, final button, and all 3 of them felt the weight of it. Let's go, she said. Post-op was on the 2nd floor, the secured end, the part of the ward that did not appear on the publicly available hospital directory. Ortega led them through a route that avoided the main corridor, which told Gwen the main corridor was not currently safe, which told her the operation in this building had expanded in the 20 minutes she had been on the 3rd floor. She did not ask about it. She kept moving and let the information come to her rather than reaching for it, because reaching for it would have meant slowing down. Alcott was outside Riker's room when they arrived. He looked at Gwen first. His eyes dropped to her breast pocket for exactly 1 second, then came back up. She nodded once. He nodded back. It was the most economical exchange of meaningful information she had ever participated in. 1 minute before you go in, he said, not to Huang, to Gwen, specifically to her. He moved slightly aside and she understood that was an invitation, so she stepped close enough for a conversation that didn't need to travel. His voice was very low. The man security picked up. He's been assigned to this base for 18 months. He's been feeding operational intelligence to a command structure that runs above his official chain. We don't know yet how many others are embedded here. He paused. What I'm telling you is that I cannot guarantee the security of this building beyond this immediate space. The people I trust are the people in that room last night. That is my complete list. She looked at him. Why are you telling me this before I go in to see Riker? Because you're about to hear things from him that will require you to make a decision. And I want you to make it with accurate information. What decision? He held her gaze. The drive contains documentation of 11 operations over 4 years. Names of individuals ordered killed who were not combatants. Names of individuals who gave those orders. Financial routing from accounts that connect to 3 active general officers. He said it quietly, the way you say things that are too large for volume. Riker has been trying to get this to a Senate Oversight Committee for 14 months. Every attempt has been intercepted. Every contact he made was identified and either turned or removed. A pause. There is one channel left that we believe is clean. One journalist, civilian, outside the military structure, with the specific national security credentials to receive this type of material without triggering an immediate suppression response. Riker knows who it is. He'll tell you. He stopped. He won't tell me. She processed that. Why not? Because I'm in the system, Alcott said, and the system is what broke him. He said it without self-pity and without drama, with the specific weight of a man who has looked at an honest accounting of himself and accepted the number. He trusts you because you're outside all of it. You have no history in this structure, no obligations, no exposure. You're the only person in this building right now who has nothing to lose by doing the right thing. That's not entirely accurate, she said. No, he agreed, it's not anymore. He looked at her steadily. I'm sorry for that. She hadn't expected the apology, not from him, not delivered that cleanly, without qualification or softening. She held it for a moment and then set it aside, because the moment wasn't built for processing apologies. Open the door, she said. Caleb Riker did not look like a ghost. She had half expected him to. The word had been applied to him so many times in the last 24 hours, in so many contexts, that she had formed an image. But the man in the post-op bed was deeply, visibly real. He was 35 or 36, she estimated. He had the same physical build as Henderson, the same quality of density, but it was overlaid with 14 months of hard living, lean in the specific way that comes from sustained scarcity, not fitness. His face had the particular hollowness of a man who had been running on adrenaline and will for so long that rest had become a foreign concept his body no longer recognized. He looked at her when she came in, and she watched his face do something she hadn't expected. It relaxed. Not entirely, not the deep relaxation of safety, which she suspected he hadn't felt in over a year, but in the way a person's face relaxes when they see something they recognize as true. She had done nothing to earn that reaction. She had just walked through the door, but she understood it anyway, because she had spent 6 years reading patients' faces. And what his said was, finally, someone I didn't have to choose. Someone the situation chose for me. You're the Ohio nurse, he said. His voice was rougher than she expected, abraded by time and dehydration, and the specific rawness of someone who had not spoken casually to another person in a very long time. Gwen Jenkins, she said. Columbus. How far did you have to go to find it? Secondary cart, left rear wheel housing. She watched his face. You knew nobody would check the overflow cart. They never check the overflow cart, he said. In any hospital, in any country, nobody ever checks the one that isn't being used. He almost smiled. You thought like I do. I thought like a nurse who has run out of supplies mid-procedure and had to raid the backup, she said. It's not the same thing. This time he did smile, briefly, and it transformed his face in a way that surprised her. He had probably been someone who smiled easily before all of this. Someone with good humor and directness, and the specific confidence of a person who was very good at a very hard thing and knew it. She could see who he had been in the ruins of who 14 months had made him. It made her angry in a quiet, building way that she set aside for later. The drive, he said. She unbuttoned her breast pocket and placed it on the tray beside him without handing it to him directly. A clinical instinct, the distance of a professional maintaining her own position, and he looked at it for a long moment without touching it. She wondered how long he had been carrying it, how many times he had been within hours of losing it, how many times he had moved it, re-hidden it, recalculated. I need you to take it to a woman named Rachel Marsh, he said. Washington Post, National Security Desk. She has a source protocol. You'll need to tell her 3 words when you contact her. Just those 3 words and she'll know the chain of custody is intact. He looked up. Are you ready? Tell me once and I'll have it, she said. He looked at her for a beat, verifying that claim, and then he gave her the 3 words. Specific, unconnected. The kind of passphrase that held meaning only to 2 people who had agreed on it in advance. Proof of a plan laid 14 months ago against the possibility that something like today would eventually happen. She repeated them back once. Exactly. He exhaled. Long, slow, the breath of a man releasing a tension that had been structural for so long he had forgotten it was weight. You have to go through civilian channels, he said. Not the base, not the JAG office, not any military infrastructure. Civilian only. The moment this enters a military chain, it gets buried. It has been buried 3 times already. He paused. Marsh knows what to do with it. She's been waiting. She's been expecting this? She's been expecting someone, he said. She didn't know it would be a nurse from Ohio. Another brief, broken ghost of a smile. Neither did I. She looked at him. At the tray, at the drive, she felt the full weight of the axis the moment was balanced on. All of it, all 11 operations, all the names, all the orders, all the men who had signed off on things that should not have been done and had relied on institutional invisibility to keep them safe. All of it sitting in a breast pocket on a Tuesday morning in a post-op room in San Diego, held by someone who 3 days ago had been a civilian trauma nurse worried about a blister on her heel. Is there anyone else, she said, anyone who can do this instead of you, who knows Marsh, who has the passphrase? His face answered before his voice did. There was, he said. There were 2 others. They're why I'm in this bed. She held that. Let it be what it was. I'll get it to her, she said. I know, he said, and the certainty in it was not the aggressive certainty of someone trying to convince themselves. It was the quiet certainty of a man who had made a sound assessment and reached a sound conclusion. You didn't have to come back this morning. You came back. That told me everything. She picked up the drive and put it back in her pocket and buttoned it again. I'm going to have someone check your pain management before I leave. You've been lying here being stoic, and that's not actually helpful to your recovery. He blinked. Then he laughed. A real one, short and surprised. The laugh of a man who has not been talked to like a normal person in far too long. Yeah, he said. Okay. She was at the door when he said her name. She turned. The colonel, he said, the one running the enforcement side. His name is Hargrove. Gerald Hargrove. He's not here in this building, but he is aware of this building, and he will be moving toward it. He paused. He's the one who staged my death. He's the one who sent the men to my team. He's the one who threatened Huang's daughter. His eyes were very direct, very clear. The eyes of a man who had been keeping this information alive by force of will for over a year. Put his name in the package to Marsh. Put it first. She held his gaze. Hargrove, she said. Gerald Hargrove, he confirmed. Colonel, retired on paper, not retired in practice. She nodded once and went back through the door. Alcott was waiting exactly where she had left him. Henderson had arrived. She didn't know when. He must have been moved or moved himself, and she suspected it was the latter because he was upright and mobile in a way that his medical chart would not have endorsed. Ortega was against the wall. Huang was on her phone, speaking quietly, her face held with the careful fragility of a woman who has been told her daughter is safe and is still waiting for her body to believe it. Hargrove, she said to Alcott. He went very still. You know that name, she said. Yes, he said. How long? He was quiet for a moment, a deliberate, weighted quiet. Long enough that my not acting on it sooner is something I'll have to account for, he said. Not to you, to a larger process, but yes, long enough. She looked at him. She thought about what Ortega had said the day before. Somewhere in between, not the enemy, but not entirely safe. She thought about a man who had been inside a corrupt system long enough to see it clearly, and not long enough to know what to do about it. Standing at a threshold he had been approaching for a very long time, and she was the one who had accidentally pushed him through it by saying 2 words from a radio that wasn't a radio. The journalist is Rachel Marsh at the Post, she said. I have the passphrase. I need a civilian phone. Nothing connected to this base. Nothing registered to military infrastructure. She looked at Huang. Huang ended her call. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a personal cell phone. Not her hospital issue, not her regular phone, the spare one, the backup. She held it out. I bought it for Sophie, she said. For emergencies, she paused. This qualifies. Gwen took it. She looked at Alcott. The men still in this building. Being addressed, he said. His voice was quieter than usual, with a quality she could not immediately name, and then could. Gravity. Simple, direct gravity. Whatever you're about to do, he said, you don't have to do it alone. That option is closed. We passed it. She looked at him. She thought about the first morning, the flat assessment when she walked in, the involuntary way his eyes had tracked Alcott's return to the room, the careful, measured voice that hid exactly as much as it revealed. She thought about him saying, you don't have to do this, as if it genuinely mattered to him whether she chose. She thought about the fact that she had chosen anyway, and he had watched her choose with the specific expression of a man who had hoped she would and hadn't asked her to. I know, she said, and she meant it in the complete way, not just the immediate logistical fact of it, but everything underneath, the whole 3 days, the whole accumulated weight of it. She knew. She turned to the window of Riker's post-op room. He was watching her through the glass, and she held up the phone so he could see it, and he nodded once, and she turned away and dialed. The phone rang twice. A woman's voice, direct, alert, no wasted syllables. Marsh. Gwen said the 3 words. Silence. Then with a different quality, focused, sharpened, the voice of someone whose entire body has just oriented toward a point. Where are you? Naval Medical Center, San Diego. I need a secure extraction point for a physical package. Civilian only. How fast can you move? A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. 6 hours, Marsh said. Can you hold it 6 hours? Gwen looked at Alcott. He had heard. He made a small gesture, a slight incline of his head. Possible. Barely. Yes, Gwen said, 6 hours. She paused. I need you to know the source of this material. His name is Caleb Riker. He was listed as KIA 14 months ago. He is alive and currently recovering from a gunshot wound in this building. His survival is connected to the evidence, and you will need to address both. She paused. And I need you to know the primary name in the documentation. Colonel Gerald Hargrove. Retired on paper only. He is currently moving toward this location. Another pause. Longer this time. When Marsh spoke again, her voice had a quality that Gwen could not name. Not fear, not surprise, something more complex. The voice of a person who has been waiting for a confirmation of something they suspected was real and has just received it. How did you get to this? She said. Who are you? Gwen thought about the question. About a shift change 3 days ago, a red striped chart, a signed NDA form, a room full of silent men, and 2 words she said without thinking. She thought about the blister on her heel that she had completely forgotten about. She thought about Ohio and about bodies wanting to heal, and about the fact that fixing things was the one instinct she had trusted completely her entire adult life. I'm a nurse, she said. I fix things. She lowered the phone and turned back to the room, and everyone in it looked at her with the same expression. Different faces, different histories, different degrees of trust, but the same thing underneath it. The specific shared recognition of people who are facing something together that none of them could face alone, and who have only just understood that the person standing in the middle of it, holding it together, is the one no one saw coming. Outside the room, somewhere below them in the building, an alarm began to sound. Not the clinical soft tone of a medical alert, the hard, flat tone of a security breach. Ortega and the 2 other men moved to the door before the second pulse finished. Alcott straightened. Henderson took his weight off the wall. Gwen buttoned her pocket closed over the drive. She looked at Alcott. "Hargrove didn't wait 2 hours," she said. "No," he said. "He didn't." She said nothing else. She just looked at the people in the room. These men, this doctor, this operation she had stumbled into by accident and stayed in by choice. And she thought that this was the part of the story where a person from Columbus, Ohio, who fixed things because they needed fixing and didn't know how to stop, found out exactly how much she could hold. She was about to find out. The security alarm had been running for 40 seconds when Alcott made his first call, and by the time it hit 90 seconds, he had made 3 more, each one shorter than the last. Each one with the clipped precision of a man issuing instructions he had rehearsed 100 times for a situation he had hoped would never arrive. Gwen watched him do it and understood something she had not fully understood before. Alcott had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Not this specific Tuesday, but this shape of Tuesday. The day the thing he had been managing from inside finally broke past the threshold of management. Ortega came back through the door. East stairwell, 2 men, armed, moving up from the first floor. Building security is responding, but they're not equipped for this. These aren't hospital intruders. They're moving like a unit. "How many people know Riker is in this building?" Gwen said. "Too many," Alcott said. He finished his 4th call and pocketed the phone and looked at the room with the flat assessment of a man conducting a rapid inventory of available assets. His eyes stopped on Gwen. "The drive needs to leave this building." Marsh said 6 hours. Marsh doesn't know Hargrove moved early. He held her gaze. 6 hours is gone. We need a new plan in the next 4 minutes. Henderson straightened fully. The last pretense of being a recovering patient dropped completely. He was in pain. Gwen could see it in the set of his jaw, in the way he was distributing his weight. And he was ignoring it with the practiced totality of someone who had spent years deciding when pain was relevant information and when it was not. "Extraction route," he said to Alcott. "Not the standard corridor. They've mapped the standard corridors or they wouldn't have gotten to the stairwell that fast." "Loading dock is compromised," Ortega said. "Main entrance has civilian foot traffic. They won't move on us in the open. Too visible. East is the stairwell." He paused. "West utility corridor connects to the base vehicle yard. It runs below the building through the maintenance level." "That's a known route," Alcott said. "It's a known route to us," Ortega said. "These are hospital-embedded assets. They know the facility, but they don't know our internal planning. They know where we'd go if we were following standard procedure." He looked at Alcott. "When have we ever followed standard procedure?" Something moved in Alcott's face. Not a smile. He was not a man who smiled at moments like this, but the particular tightening around the eyes of a man who recognizes a sound argument and is already acting on it. "West utility corridor," he said. "We move in 2 minutes." "Riker can't be moved," Huang said from the corner. She had been standing very still, phone pressed against her chest, the call with Sophie's school apparently completed. Her composure returned in the functional, brittle way of a woman operating on willpower and maternal relief. "His wound is stable, but transport risk is—" "We're not moving Riker," Alcott said. He looked at Huang with an expression that was not unkind, but was not soft. "You're staying with him. You and one of my men. If anyone comes through that door without the right face, you make noise. Loud noise. Civilian facility, civilian witnesses. They won't execute in front of witnesses. That's the only rule they've held on to." "That's a thin rule to bet a life on," Huang said. "Yes," he said simply. "It is. I'm sorry." He turned to Gwen. "You move with me." "The drive goes with me," she said. "Not with you, with me." He looked at her. 1 second. "Yes, because if something happens to you in that corridor, I need to be able to keep moving. If something happens to me—" She stopped. She turned to Henderson. "If something happens to me, The passphrase is in Riker's room. Ask him directly. He'll give it to you. She held Henderson's eyes. You call Marsh yourself. Civilian phone only. You don't let it go through any system connected to this base. Henderson looked at her with that expression she had come to recognize, the one that recalibrated something internal, and said quietly, Nothing is going to happen to you. That's not a guarantee you can make, she said. So I'm making a plan instead. He held her gaze for one more second. Fair enough, he said, and the way he said it told her that he had stopped managing her somewhere in the last 24 hours and had started simply respecting her. And she felt that shift the way you feel a change in weather. Clean and definitive. They moved. The west utility corridor was narrow and low-lit and ran under the building at an angle that Gwen tracked mentally, mapping it against the hospital's above-ground layout. Alcott moved ahead of her, Ortega behind. The two other men whose names she still did not know flanked wide. It was the first time she had watched them move in an operational configuration rather than a wardroom configuration, and the difference was stark. They became something else entirely, fluid and silent and utterly coordinated, the product of years of shared training that had become instinct. She kept her pace matched to theirs and did not slow them down, which she could tell mattered to them even if none of them said it. Her hand was pressed against her breast pocket. She could feel the hard edge of the drive through the fabric. She thought about Riker's face when she said she would get it to Marsh, the simple, complete certainty in it. She thought about the fact that he had handed 14 months of survival to a nurse he'd identified by voice during a surgical procedure. And she thought that either he was the best judge of character she had ever encountered, or he had been so desperate for a clean hand to pass it to that anyone outside the system would have done. She hoped it was the former. She suspected it was both. They were 3/4 of the way through the corridor when Ortega said, "Wait," and they all stopped. She heard it 2 seconds after he did, the specific acoustic signature of a door opening somewhere ahead. The sound of weight on metal grating, the kind of sound that a utility space makes when it is not used regularly and someone is moving through it who does not know its rhythms. Alcott made a hand signal she did not know but understood from context. Stop. Hold. They held. Silence. 12 seconds of it. Then footsteps, moving across rather than toward them, someone crossing perpendicular at a junction up ahead, and then diminishing, and then gone. Alcott made another signal. Move. Careful. They moved careful. At the junction, she saw what Ortega had heard. A door to a secondary maintenance branch, still swinging slightly on its return tension, recently passed through. Whoever it was had crossed their path without intersecting it by maybe 30 seconds. She did not know if that was luck or planning or something in between. She did not have enough information to assess it, and not having enough information to assess something was the thing she had said scared her most. She let it sit unresolved and kept moving. The vehicle yard was cold and open, and Gwen felt the exposure of it immediately. The sky above, the space around. After the corridor's confinement, it felt vast and visible in a way that made her want to compress herself somehow, to take up less space in the open air. She resisted it. She kept her posture neutral. Just a nurse. Just a person walking across a vehicle yard. Alcott was on his phone again. He spoke for 30 seconds, listened for 10, and lowered it. Vehicle at the east gate in 4 minutes, he said. Civilian registered. Driver is clean. He's been outside this system for 2 years. He's not on any list they're working from. Who is he? Ortega said. Someone who owes me, Alcott said. It was the most personal thing he had said in 3 days, and he said it like he was filing a report, quickly and without emphasis. But Gwen caught the weight underneath it. The specific weight of a man calling in a debt he had been holding for a long time against exactly this kind of moment. What's the plan when we get out of the building? She said. Marsh is 6 hours away by her timeline. We have a drive and a passphrase and a colonel who moved early, and we are now outside the building without a room to go back to. She looked at Alcott. What comes next? There is a safe house, he said, 20 minutes from here. It's not in any system I've used in the last 5 years. It's not connected to me officially. He paused. It's connected to Riker. He set it up 14 months ago for exactly this contingency. He sent me the location this morning in the same message that told me to give it to the Ohio nurse. She absorbed that. He planned this, not just the drive, the whole extraction architecture. He planned it from the beginning. He planned it the day he ran, Alcott said. He knew that if he ever got close enough to pass the evidence, he would also be close enough for them to try to take it back. So he built a chain. He looked at her. He just didn't know who would be at the end of it. She thought about a man who had staged his own death, run for 14 months, survived a gunshot wound, and still had enough operational clarity left to set up a contingency safe house and encode a message in the moment of his near death, telling Alcott to trust a nurse he had never met. She thought about what Henderson had said. He was the best we ever had. She believed it completely. The vehicle arrived in 3 minutes and 40 seconds, not 4. A dark blue civilian sedan, unremarkable, driven by a man in his late 50s with a careful face and hands that were steady on the wheel, and eyes that scanned the yard in a single practice sweep when he pulled in. He did not get out. He looked at Alcott through the windshield and then looked forward again and waited. Alcott said to Gwen, "Get in." She turned back toward the building, toward the second floor, toward the post-op room where Riker was lying in a bed with Huang beside him and one of Alcott's men at the door. "He's going to be all right," Ortega said beside her. She had not realized she had turned until he said it. He said it quietly, without performance, a straightforward assessment from someone whose straightforward assessments she had come to trust. "Huang is good. Physically, he's stabilizing. And the men in this building who are working against us are running out of time. When we clear that gate, the exposure shifts. They know it. They'll pull back." "How do you know they'll pull back?" "Because Hargrove is strategic. He doesn't burn institutions he might need later." Ortega looked at her steadily. "He'll reassess, regroup, try to intercept the pass-off to Marsh." He paused. "Which is why the 6-hour window matters, and why the safe house matters. We get there, we hold the drive secure, we establish contact with Marsh on a clean channel, and we run out the clock until the handoff." She looked at him. "And then it's over?" He was quiet for a moment. "The immediate situation, yes." He held her gaze. "The larger situation, what comes after Marsh publishes? What comes after Hargrove's name is in print? What comes after 11 operations get documented in a national newspaper? That is not over for a long time." He said it honestly, without softening it. "I want you to know that before you get in the car." She appreciated it. She appreciated that he told her the true version, not the manageable version, not the version designed to keep her moving. She had asked for that on the first day, not in words, but in the way she engaged with every person in that ward, with directness and without the pretense that comfort was more important than truth. "Thank you," she said. She got in the car. The drive to the safe house took 22 minutes. Alcott sat in the front. Ortega sat beside her in the back. Nobody spoke much. Outside the windows, San Diego moved past in its ordinary Tuesday configuration. Traffic lights, palm trees, the specific flat brightness of a coastal morning, and Gwen sat with her hand pressed against her pocket and thought about how completely ordinary the world looked from inside a moving car when the world was, in fact, not ordinary at all. She thought about her apartment in Columbus, about the particular silence of it before a shift, the good coffee she made every morning as an anchor to normalcy, the small, careful life she had built around a job she loved. She thought about how far she was from that life right now, not just geographically, not just in the raw distance between Ohio and San Diego, but in every other measurable dimension. She thought about whether she would be able to return to it, whether the person who made that coffee and drove that route and moved through that life was still available to her, or whether the last 3 days had closed a door she hadn't known was open until it shut. She didn't have an answer. She let the question sit and watched San Diego pass and kept her hand on her pocket. The safe house was a ground-floor unit in a residential building, nondescript, no visible external characteristics that distinguished it from the units on either side. The driver pulled in and stayed with the car. Alcott had the key. Inside, it was sparse and functional, the kind of space that had been prepared for use rather than lived in, stocked with the basics of extended occupation, clean lines, and minimal personality. It felt, Gwen thought, like Riker himself, precise, prepared, nothing wasted. Alcott checked the room. Ortega checked the exits. Both of them did it quickly, and then they settled. And the change in both of them when they stopped moving was striking. They were still alert, still operational, but the specific compressed energy of the corridor in the vehicle yard had eased by one fraction. And in that fractional ease, she could see how tired they were. Not physically, the other kind. The sustained weariness of people who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and were still a few hours from being able to put it down. She sat on the edge of a chair and took the drive out of her pocket and set it on the table in front of her and looked at it. Ortega sat across from her. He looked at it too. After a moment, he said, 11 operations, that's what you're holding. I know. 3 general officers, that's not a small thing. That's a restructuring of an entire command hierarchy. He looked up at her. The fallout from this is going to be significant. Good, she said. The word came out flat and complete, without heat, without performance. Just the clean assessment of a person who had spent 3 days inside the specific damage that the protected wrong can do, and who had no ambiguity about the right outcome. He looked at her. Then he nodded, once, in the way she had come to recognize as his version of agreement. Alcott came and sat at the table. He placed his phone face up between them. I'm going to contact Marsh through a relay that Riker pre-established. It routes through 3 civilian nodes. No military infrastructure anywhere in the chain. The call will be brief. We confirm the location in the transfer protocol. She sends a courier. He looked at Gwen. You make the final handoff, not me, not Ortega, you. Because I'm outside the system, she said. Because you're the one Riker chose, he said. Chain of custody is everything for what Marsh is going to do with this. She needs to be able to say that the transfer from source to journalist was handled by a civilian with no prior connection to military intelligence or covert operations. Someone whose credibility is clean. He paused. Someone who has nothing to gain from what happens next. She looked at him. I have something to lose. I know, he held her gaze. And so does Riker, and so does Marsh, and they both decided you were the right person anyway. He picked up the phone. That's not a small thing, Gwen. She had told herself his apology from earlier was not something she had time to process. She had been right about that. But this was different. This was not apology. This was recognition. And the two things affected her differently, and she let herself feel the difference for exactly as long as she could afford. Make the call, she said. He made the call. The next 4 hours were the strangest of her life, which was a significant statement given the preceding 72 hours. They held the safe house. Ortega made coffee that was surprisingly good, and she drank 2 cups and felt human in a way she had not felt since before her last real sleep. Alcott spoke to 2 people she never identified, in conversations she was present for, but not part of, and each call seemed to tighten the perimeter of the situation around a more manageable shape. Henderson sent 1 text to Ortega's phone, 2 words, Riker, stable, and the room exhaled. She called her mother from the civilian phone. She did not say where she was or what had happened or what was in her pocket. She said she was fine and that work had been busy and that she missed home. Her mother said she sounded tired and told her to eat something, And Gwen said she would, and she felt the full, extraordinary distance between the conversation she was having and the one she was inside, and she was grateful for both of them simultaneously. At the 4-hour mark, a knock at the door. Alcott was on his feet before the second knock. Ortega moved left. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock, a pattern, deliberate. Alcott's posture changed. He opened the door. The woman who came in was in her mid-40s, dark-haired, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a messenger bag with a specific shoulder lean of someone who had been carrying things like this for a long time. She looked at Alcott first, a brief, professional assessment, and then her eyes moved to Gwen, and they stayed. "Rachel Marsh," the woman said, "you're the nurse." "Yes," Gwen said. "You're younger than I expected." "You're earlier than 6 hours," Gwen said. "I was already moving before you called," Marsh said. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, the delivery of someone who does not feel the need to explain their preparation. "I've been waiting for this chain to complete for 11 months. When the passphrase hit, I was already packed." She moved to the table and placed her bag on it and looked at the drive. She did not touch it. "Chain of custody," she said. "Tell me exactly how it came to you." Gwen told her. All of it, straightforward, precise, in order, the transfer, the staging corridor, the secondary cart, the alcove, the supply room, Riker's room, every link in the chain. Marsh listened without interrupting, and when Gwen finished, she nodded once, slowly, the nod of a person confirming a structure she had already partially mapped. "Caleb Riker is alive," Marsh said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Recovering in Naval Medical Center, San Diego," Gwen said. "Gunshot wound, stabilized. Doctor Patricia Huang is his attending." "Hargrove?" "His last known position was moving toward the hospital. That was 4 hours ago." "He's been redirected," Alcott said from where he was standing. Marsh looked at him. Something passed between them. Not warmth, but the specific recognition of 2 people who have been operating in adjacent spaces for a long time without directly intersecting. Base security made contact with the 2 embedded assets. When the extraction left the building and the assets went dark, Hargrove pulled back. He knows the drive is outside his perimeter now. He paused. He's calculating his next move. "He won't have time for a next move," Marsh said. "Not after tonight." She looked at Gwen. "You need to be the one who gives it to me. I need you on record as a transfer point. Name, credentials, direct account of every step. Are you prepared for that?" She thought about what Ortega had said in the car. The immediate situation, the larger situation, the long time. She thought about 11 operations and 3 general officers and a man in a post-op bed who had been running for over a year with one thing in his hands and one destination in his mind. She thought about Hargrove slamming his fist into an orderly's jaw in a stairwell and saying, "Fix it, or I will fix you." And she thought about what it meant that the fix he had been counting on had not worked. Had not worked because of her. She reached into her breast pocket. She unbuttoned it for the last time and took out the drive, and she placed it in Rachel Marsh's open hand, and she held Marsh's gaze and said, clearly, for the record, for every link in the chain and everything that came after, "My name is Gwen Jenkins. I am a civilian trauma nurse assigned to Naval Medical Center, San Diego. This was given to me by Caleb Riker, alive, competent, and of sound mind, for the explicit purpose of transfer to Rachel Marsh of the Washington Post. The chain of custody is intact, and I will testify to every step of it." Marsh closed her hand around the drive. She held it. Just for a moment she held it, and her face did something that Gwen suspected it did not often do in professional settings. It showed what it felt. Relief. The specific, enormous relief of a person who has been holding vigil over a truth for a very long time and has finally seen it land somewhere safe. "Thank you," Marsh said, simple, unembellished. the weight of it entirely in those two words. Gwen nodded. Alcott spoke from the far wall. There's a protocol issue we need to address. Hargrove knows who Gwen is. He knows she was in that building. He knows she left it. When this breaks, and it will break within 24 hours of Marsh filing, Hargrove's response to exposure will be to attack every link in the chain of custody, every person who touched this. He looked at Gwen. That includes you. I know, she said. There are protective options. We can facilitate. I'm not going into protective custody, she said. I am not hiding. She looked at him steadily. I am a civilian nurse who found a piece of medical tape in a supply room. That is what I am. I go back to work. I do my job. And if Hargrove wants to explain in public why a nurse from Ohio is a threat to him, I encourage him to try. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Ortega said, "She's right." And the way he said it closed the debate completely. She called the hospital from the civilian phone and told the floor supervisor she had experienced a family emergency and would be returning to her shift the following morning. The floor supervisor said fine and asked if she was all right, and she said yes. She was fine, she just needed the night. She meant both things. She was fine. She needed the night. Marsh left with two people Gwen had not seen arrive, through a door she had not known existed in the safe house layout, which she supposed was exactly how Riker would have designed it. She watched them go and felt the moment shift underneath her. The acute phase ending, the operational urgency dropping by a specific and measurable degree, like a pressure system passing. She sat back in her chair. She put her empty hand flat on the table and looked at it. The pocket was unbuttoned. The drive was gone. Her hand was just her hand. Ortega sat across from her again. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "How are you doing, actually?" She thought about it, the honest version, the one she would give to someone who had earned it. "I don't know yet," she said. "I'll know tomorrow, when it's real in a different way." He nodded. He understood that. She could tell he understood it from the inside, from personal experience, from the specific knowledge of someone who had learned that the real cost of high-stakes moments doesn't invoice until the adrenaline clears. Henderson arrived at the safe house at 9 that evening. He should not have been discharged. He had clearly discharged himself, which surprised no one. He came in and looked at Gwen and said nothing for a moment, and she looked back at him and said nothing. And the specific language of that silence between them was clear enough that words would have been redundant. "Riker's going to make it," he said finally. "I know," she said. "He asked about you when he woke up again." He paused. He asked if the Ohio nurse was okay. She felt that. The particular warmth of being thought of by a person who had every reason to think only of themselves, who had chosen instead to spend a moment of hard-won consciousness checking on someone else. "Tell him I'm okay," she said. "Tell him it's done." Henderson nodded. Then, with the deliberateness of a man who chooses his words the way he chooses everything, precisely with intention, he said, "You walked into our ward 3 days ago, and you didn't know anything. And you walked out of it knowing everything. And you didn't run, and you didn't fold." He held her gaze. "I've served with people who trained their whole lives for this. You did it in 72 hours. She looked at him. She felt the truth of what he said, and she felt the impossibility of receiving it gracefully, because she was from Columbus, Ohio, and she fixed things because she didn't know how to stop. And the idea of being recognized for it sat strangely on her, like a coat cut for someone else's shoulders. But she was also tired and honest, and she had spent 3 days deciding that pretending things were smaller than they were served no one. So she let it land. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it in the complete way. 3 weeks later, the story broke. It ran in the Washington Post at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, with Rachel Marsh's byline and a document count of over 400 pages and a list of names that reached the highest levels of a command structure that had believed itself invisible. The story named 11 operations, The story named 3 general officers. The story named Gerald Hargrove, Colonel, retired on paper only, not retired in practice. And the world he had built around himself began to come apart with a specific, inexorable momentum of a structure whose supports had been removed at the foundation. The story did not name Gwen Jenkins. That was her condition, and Marsh had honored it. The story said only that the chain of custody had been maintained through a civilian intermediary at Naval Medical Center, San Diego, and anyone who wanted to know more than that was welcome to keep wanting. She was on shift when it broke. She found out from a resident who came in with his phone face up, the headline visible across the screen, and she glanced at it and felt the thing she had been waiting 3 weeks to feel. Not triumph, not relief, not the dramatic emotional resolution that movies would have assigned to the moment. Just a quiet, solid sense of completion. The specific feeling of a job finished. The feeling she got after every complicated case where the body had wanted to heal, and she had helped it, and the thing that was broken had stopped being broken, and she could move to the next one. She checked Henderson's last text. He had sent it at 6:15, 9 minutes after the story went live. 3 words. Read it. Good. She put her phone back in her pocket and went to find her next patient. Caleb Riker had run for 14 months, carrying the truth inside a building no one was supposed to find. A 24-year-old nurse from Ohio had walked through the wrong door on a Thursday and said 2 words she didn't understand, and the silence that followed had been the beginning of the end of the thing those words protected. She had not known what she was starting. She had only known how to not stop. And in the end, that had been exactly enough.